So we've been listening to local people here in Battersea this afternoon. It is Labour held, but only by the smallest of margins, 300 votes, just slightly above that. It's number 9 on the Conservative Party hit list. Let's chat to the candidates and see what they think they've got to convince local voters to vote for them. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, it's a bit chilly isn't it? Okay, let's and windy as well. Let's start with the incumbent. Apologies, ladies, but Martin, why should people vote for you?
Well, I think the most important issue by far is going to be the economy. I mean, if you look up and down this street, this wonderful shopping street here, what the shopkeepers will be looking for is somebody who's got a sure hand with the economy. And I found the Conservative manifesto very worrying because George Osborne's talking about a budget within 50 days taking $6 billion out of the economy. Now, of course, we've got to reduce the deficit, and we've got to take money out of the economy over the next few years. But to try and take $6 billion out within this actual financial year, it's a huge risk of pushing the economy back into recession just when we're coming out of it, to do this so precipitately. So I'm rather alarmed by what they're saying. I think it's very important to do what the government's planning to do at the moment, to leave the reduction in deficit to start in 2011 once we've got the recovery established.
Okay, Jane, not too much too soon, and that's what your government would do.
Well, I find it very curious that if you think that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Starling, has identified himself £11 billion, which he says is waste, why would you not start tackling it straight away? If you ask any business here in Northcote Road, if you've identified an area of wasteful spending, would you wait a year to start tackling it? Or would you start tackling it straight away in order to get your costs down? And that's what we're saying. Plus, we're saying that will then enable us to stop the national insurance rise going ahead for employers, which is a tax on jobs. It's another thing that will push people out of work at a time when we need to be generating more jobs and we need to be getting the private sector growing again, generating wealth.
Layla, what did you think about the Tory Party manifesto?
Well, I came from work and I had about an hour with it, but I have to say what I saw was essentially the same old Tory Party, but this time in sheep's clothing. I'm really very worried by what I've seen. What they are promising is change, but then when you look at things like how they're redistributing tax, which they're not, essentially they're giving tax breaks to the most wealthy and they're giving tax breaks to married couples, but what about everyone else? And what the Liberal Democrats are offering is a big redistribution of the tax system, where everyone earning under £100,000 gets $700 back. That's fair, and I'm afraid to say I just don't believe they're going to deliver of this power to the people business. It's just not going to happen.
It's not actually accurate to say that any of the things that we've talked about in terms of tax reductions are aimed at the wealthy. Quite the opposite. I mean, the Conservatives have said that the recognising marriage in the tax system will be for families on lower income, that will be protecting people in lower income jobs from the public sector pay freeze. In everything that we've said, we've actually been looking to protect people on lower incomes, and we've said that the 50p tax rate should go ahead. So I do push back at you on that. I don't think that is an accurate representation of what we've been saying at all.
Well, of course, the reductions in inheritance tax will benefit the richest 3% of the states in this country. So it's not true to say that all these tax cuts are focused on low incomes. But what is absolutely crucial in this is also a question of timing. I mean, obviously, every government department already has targets for reducing wasteful spending and for efficiency savings. But when we're talking about a £6 billion reduction being pushed through this year when the recovery isn't even established, it's the risk that has.
1 in £100 of government spending, though, Martin. 1 in £100. Every business, every household could identify 1 in £100 of money they could reduce, weight efficiencies they could make. To say $6 billion is to make it sound like an enormous figure. In context of government spending, it's a relatively modest figure.
To achieve it, I mean...
So you've got to listen to economists when you're dealing with the economy. I'm sorry. No, well, some of them do, and it seems to me that actually instead of giving the people just what they want to hear, yes, it's true, we do need to make economies everywhere, but I'd much rather see people coming together and talking about this and doing it at a time that it's right for the economy, not when it's right for political dogma. And
terribly, calling businessmen nauseating and all of these sorts of things. I mean, find that quite embarrassing.
No, it's not at all. What we're saying it how it is. Some of those businessmen are indeed nauseating. What we're actually asking is for a Council of Financial Stability to be set up so that you've got cross-party talks. This is a big issue. And the idea that one person is going to go ahead and make cuts on their own without consulting with a much wider mandate on where you make those cuts, how you make them. Well, yes, indeed. And we'll see what people have to say. And do they trust you to protect key services?
We'll have to see what happens on the 23rd of April, because that's when the next figures are out, and that's when we find out what's happening as far as growth is concerned. That could be almost pivotal for your seat here.
Well, absolutely, because I mean, whatever it shows, it'll certainly show that the recovery is still in its very early stages and it's still very fragile, and that's why it would be so dangerous to rush into a big £6 billion cut. Maybe 1% of the economy, but to push that through in a single year, is very ill-advised. And given that there are, I mean, I think it's very important. I understand businessmen are concerned about any tax on jobs because it comes out of their pockets at the end of the day. But it's very important that with this reduction of the deficit, we're going to halve the deficit in 4 years. There's got to be a balance between cuts in public spending and tax increases, and they've got to be timed together. Just rushing ahead with cuts without anything else and cutting taxes is
they're identified.
very,
Your
very
Chancellor
risky,
identified
strategy.
this waste. It's your Chancellor of the Exchequer
Well, of course.
identified the waste, and you're saying that it's somehow economically productive to carry on wasting money for another year. I just don't get that.
That's the other thing about the manifesto that worried me a little bit. I'm still very unclear where all this money is coming from, because they're saying that they're going to get rid of the bulk of the deficit. That may mean half, that may mean more. I'm still not convinced that that money is going to be found anywhere other than efficiencies, and I'm suspecting, as I think many others are, that money is going to come from ordinary people's pockets and not the wealthy, because they're not doing this big tax redistribution that needs to happen before what's going to happen later, which is that everyone's going to have to start paying more.
All these cuts have got to happen. You're going to halve the deficit in 1 or 2 years, depends which party you're listening to. What about education? Will you ring-fence education?
Yes, absolutely. Education is ring-fenced, and so is Sure Start.
We've said we'd ring-fence the NHS and overseas aid.
Will you ring-fence education?
In education, like many other budgets, we'll be looking to deliver more for less, and we know we can do that.
So you'll be
We've said
expecting
that we'll
cuts.
ring-fence NHS. No, because you're accepting the fundamental argument that the Labour Party constantly
No,
say,
I'm just
which
asking
is...
you a question. Are you going to ring-fence education spending?
We haven't. We've said we'll only ring-fence the NHS and overseas aid. Those are the two budgets. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to deliver worse services.
Didn't ask you that. Just asked you
but
whether
you
were
did
going
say,
to...
was it going to be cuts? That's
Yes.
not necessarily the same thing.
Well, you can cut and provide a
You might
good
deliver
service.
more for the
Is that what
same
you're saying?
amount. You might deliver more for the same amount. And yes, you might get cuts. But the Labour Education Secretary said there's going to be cuts in the budget in certain parts of it.
Are there?
Well, I should be worried if I was a teacher hearing that. Something like 95% of the education budget is protected under a Labour government, as is health and as is Sure Start, which is not protected under the Conservatives, and also international aid. So
you're not ring-fencing education, then there will
yes,
be
we
some
are.
cuts.
Oh, schools.
Yes or no?
Schools are ring-fenced.
But not all education is ring-fenced.
There
When I
are-
asked you, you said education was ring-fenced. Now you're saying it's not.
Schools are ring-fenced.
I'm so sceptical. I mean, listen to them. You cannot ring-fence anything at a time when you need to make cuts in things. What you need to do is to spell out to people what sorts of guiding principles you're going to do it by. And so we are going to protect children, and we're going to... The poorest in society will attract a pupil premium, so that those who are going to be suffering in this recession the most, probably people, ordinary people, under the tax regimes that have been offered by the other two, you've got to set out the principles, not necessarily ring fencing. It's a lie. You can't do it.
Well, I just think that, this morning David Cameron set out an agenda for optimism, hope and change, and I think that's what we're going to try and deliver here in Battersea and across the country.
Final thought?
You've got to have a responsible approach to the economy. We've got a recovery that's on its way. We need to keep it going. We shouldn't be taking risks by taking action too quickly, but we do need to keep our eye on the essential fact that we will have to reduce that deficit, halve that deficit by 2014.
Okay, to all three of you, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's find out what's happening as far as the business news is concerned now. Here's Anna.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Let's start with Northern Rock, because two former Northern Rock bosses have been